All right, well, welcome everyone to hopefully what is going to be a very informative video. Today, we're going to be talking about tips and tricks to incorporate into your interview for your medical school application process. To help us have that conversation, I've got my lovely colleague, Amy Ahern, who we'll introduce here in a moment. But for those of you that I have not come across yet, my name is Savik Goswami, and I work in the Pomerantz Career Center as one of the career coaches. Amy, can you do a quick introduction of who you are and also welcome to the video?
Sure, you bet. Thanks for having me, Savik. So yes, I'm Amy Ahern. I'm the Assistant Director of Med School Admissions at the Carver College of Medicine at the University of Iowa. So I've had this position for about 8 years. So my main job is to coordinate all of our med school interviews and serve as our main recruiter for our college.
Excellent. Well, to kind of give the scene, can you just start by talking about what does a typical interview look like at the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine?
Yeah, you bet. So interviews look so different across the country at different med schools. So let me just talk about how ours is structured here at Carver. So we have the option for candidates to join us both in person or virtually. We like to give that choice to candidates. And so if they come in person, there are, let's see, 15 candidates that join us every couple times a week for their interview. So the interview day is actually about 6 hours spent on campus. The actual assessed part of the interview is just about an hour and a half. So what we do is we have people that will come and talk to our group of interviewees, like me, like our financial services people. One of our deans comes and shares a message with the group each day. There's lunch and a tour with current medical students. And then the interview itself is the candidate and two faculty members for 25 minutes. That's the actual interview. There's just one of those per candidate, but it's the candidate and two faculty members for 25 minutes. The first portion is structured, meaning everybody there that day gets the same three questions. And the faculty asks the question of the candidate pours their heart out, faculty member says, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. So that happens 3 times in the structured portion. And then the rest of the 25 minutes is spent unstructured with faculty asking anything else they want to get to know about the candidate. And the candidate can also ask questions of the interviewers too about why they like Carver, how they got into medicine and things like that. So the interview itself is 25 minutes. And then the other assessed portion of the day is a case-based learning session. That's facilitated by two M4s who lead the group of about 7 or 8 applicants through a case. And we do this for a couple of reasons on an interview day. Number one, we want candidates to really understand what our main style of teaching is done like, and that's in that case-based format. So in our classroom at Carver, it's a physician leading the class of about 7 or 8 students sitting around the table. They take about a month to get through a case. And so we want our interviewees to just get a baby version of how the style of teaching is done. And they do that in about 45 to 50 minutes on their interview day. So we want to give interviewees a chance to see how that teaching style fits for them. We also want to see how candidates act when they're in a group setting. So we want to know who's staring out the window, who's looking at the clock, who's bored, who's trying to make sure they know everything. And we want to know who's engaged with this kind of learning and who likes to learn in this format. So that's the other assessed portion of the interview day.
Excellent. So can you touch on a little bit about the virtual interview? Like what does a virtual interview look like at Carver in
Yeah.
comparison to like that typical day that you just laid out?
Yeah. So the virtual interview day at Carver is a lot like the one I just described. The interview itself is run exactly the same way, just via Zoom. The CBL is run exactly the same way via Zoom and using a little bit more technology because not everyone is sitting in that same room together. And the deans come and talk, financial aid comes and talks, I come and talk. We really tried to mirror the virtual interview day as similarly to our in-person one as possible. The main difference is there's no physical tour on the day of the interview, but candidates still do get to interact with our current students virtually in small breakout rooms. And then there is a video tour available as well.
Excellent. So the other common question that we always hear is a closed file interview versus an open file interview. What are some of the
Yeah,
main differences between the two? And then if you can share, what style does Carver use?
sure. So at Carver, we use what's called a closed file interview, which means the interviewers don't know anything about the candidate except for their name, where they went to school, what they majored in, and that's it before the interview begins. Because we want our interviewers to really get to know these candidates off of paper completely. In an open file interview, it's okay to assume that the interviewers have just read your whole application before you begin the interviewer. So it's really I guess, a philosophical difference about how you approach that interview. But at Carver, your interviewers will never know anything about you except for those details I shared, unless you tell them. So it's really your 25 minutes to let them get to know you as a person, how passionate you are about doing medicine, and what led you there.
Awesome. So going back to just the typical interview format, you mentioned one thing that I was hoping that you could expand a little bit more upon, and that's the case-based activity.
Sure.
What is a case-based activity and how best should a student prepare for it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't want people to prepare at all. Really, the whole point of the exercise is seeing how you interact in a group setting. In fact, we actually don't care on the interview day if you get through the case at all. We don't care if your group ever gets to the right answer. What we care about is seeing how you interact in a situation where you probably don't know anything about this. And that's how it's intended to happen. So basically, the case is these cases have been written by faculty and current students together, and they model the cases that happen in a clinic, right? So, for instance, one of the cases starts with a 42-year-old woman walks into the emergency room in extreme abdominal pain. And the group just starts going through, okay, what do we know for sure? What do we need to know? And what other information is helpful? And so that's how the case starts and it progresses. And as the group goes forward, they do get to learn further details as you would if you were interacting with a patient. They do get to learn results of tests that have been run, but it's really not about knowing the right answer. It's not about who knows the most medical knowledge. It's really about how people interact when they're in a group setting.
Awesome. Very cool. So once the interview is wrapped up, what happens after that? Like, should students follow up with interviewers, or how does that process look like, or what do you all recommend?
Yeah, great question. So I think it really depends on the school that you're interviewing at. So let's just pretend you're only interviewing at Carver. Um, in that case, I do let students know that we prefer people do not follow up with interviewers after their interview, simply because they are not admissions committee members at our school. They're faculty who volunteer their time to do this. So by doing this, they usually interview about 3 or 4 days a season. They interview upwards of 15 candidates a season. So simply put, if everybody emailed them, that would take even more of their time, right? And then they feel like they should respond. They don't know what to do. So we ask that students do not follow up after the email or after the interview. And instead, if they really want to send a note of gratitude, they can do it to various admission staff members that handle a lot of the processing of applications, which takes a lot of time. But we prefer students do not follow up with interviewers after the fact, simply because they're not admissions committee members.
So as we wrap up our video today, Amy, I was wondering if you could share with us some final tips on how students should prepare for their med school interview.
Yeah, you bet. And these probably apply to interviews for medical school as well as other professional school. So, one thing I really like to encourage students to do is prepare and practice, but not at the point of over rehearsing, so that it sounds like when you're asked a question, you open up the can and your answer just spews out as you've been doing hundreds and hundreds of times. So, again, practicing these words. When someone asks you, why do you want to be a physician? You don't want to hear yourself saying this for the first time. in your dream interview. So practice it can be even in front of the mirror or with a friend. But just make sure that it's not the first time you're hearing yourself say these words in your actual med school interview. Now, the caveat that with that though is don't practice so much that it sounds robotic. Okay. So that's something I want students to know about. Also, in our interview specifically, our interviewers are really assessing, is this person passionate about medicine? So if you are passionate about medicine, make sure that people can tell that. When your eyes light up, when you're smiling, when you're just getting excited talking about the things related to practicing medicine and helping people, let that passion be known. If that passion's not there, that's another conversation. But our interviewers are very in tune to assessing whether or not the candidate is expressing their passion for medicine. So let it be known. And then finally, I encourage candidates to bring in a padfolio or a notebook or something that they would like to have with them. It's okay to have a couple things written down on that piece of paper. And what I really encourage students to do is to write down three things. It could be a phrase, could be a word, but just kind of have yourself in the mindset that, all right, I am not getting up from this chair until these people know these three things about me, and really holding yourself to it. Sometimes when you get nervous for an interview, your mind can go blank for a second, and that's okay. You can always take time and say, that's a great question. Can I have a moment to think? That's perfectly fine. And I also like it when students have just maybe a couple of words written down on a piece of paper to help remind them of where they wanted the interview to go and what kinds of things they wanted to make sure to share. So those are my final tips, Avik.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing. I definitely connected with the idea of writing down a couple words or phrases that you want to leave behind with your interviewers. Always a great little tip to be able to say, did I cover these topics? And add little check marks next to them. Well, that wraps up our video. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, you bet.
For all of our viewers out there, if you do have more questions, feel free to send the Pomerantz Career Center an email or connect with any one of our health and wellness coaches. We're here to help. Don't feel like you have to do any of this interviewing stuff by yourself. If you need resources, if you need someone to practice with, just reach out. That is our job. We are here to help you. So that will again wrap up our video. Amy, once again, thank you so much. For all of you out there, again, let us know if you need anything. Have a great rest of your day and go Hawks. Bye.